Hey everyone, and welcome back. Ready for another deep dive. Today we're going behind the scenes of a career that sounds honestly a little drier than it actually is: cultural archive manager.
Yeah, when most people think archives, they think like dusty bookshelves, faded photographs, that kind of thing.
Right, exactly.
But the reality is so much more dynamic. It's about protecting our collective memory. It's about using really cutting-edge technology to make sure these really important pieces of history can be seen and studied for like generations to come.
So basically, way cooler than it sounds at first.
Definitely.
So you're saying it's not just about preserving the past, but like about shaping how we understand it in the future.
Absolutely. Like imagine a fire, right, ripping through a museum, total disaster.
Oh, that's awful.
The worst. But with digitization, even if the actual thing is gone, we still have its digital twin.
But that's amazing.
Yeah, and that's like the power of a cultural archive manager. That's what they do.
Wow. So they're kind of like guardians of history,
Yep.
making sure it survives,
Yeah.
even if, like, disaster strikes.
Exactly. And this responsibility, it goes way beyond just storing stuff. They're verifying stuff, researching, working with international experts, the whole 9 yards.
Wait, hold on. Back up. International travel. Didn't the guide mention that? Tell me more about that.
Okay, so like picture this. You get a call. Someone found something, some centuries old manuscript, let's say, and you might be the one who has to jump on a plane, go across the world, and check if it's the real deal.
Okay, now that's a story for the grandkids.
Yeah.
This isn't just some boring desk job.
Not at all. It's as much about, like, meticulous care as it is adventure.
So you're telling me it's kind of like detective work, too.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, I need an example.
Okay, so you're looking at a bunch of letters from the 1800s, right?
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly, boom, hidden message in the folds, like a real-life historical puzzle.
No way.
Yeah.
That's so cool. What happens next?
That's where you come in. You got to put it all together, like what was going on back then, analyze the handwriting, maybe you uncover some long-forgotten piece of history.
Wow. You literally become like a storyteller, bringing
Yeah.
these lost stories back.
Exactly.
That is way cooler than I thought. But that's got to be a tough job to get, right?
It is. The guide makes it really clear that you absolutely need passion and dedication. It's seriously competitive.
It makes sense, though. You're up against other people who are just as obsessed with history,
Yeah, exactly. It's a pretty special field.
So, all right, let's break it down. What skills do you actually need to become a cultural archive manager?
You need a really interesting mix of the traditional and modern, really. You've got to be amazing at reading to understand those old documents and writing strong writing skills to bring those stories to life.
Makes sense. You're dealing with tons of historical records. But you also mentioned needing tech skills. What does that even mean in this job?
Well, think about digitization. That's where it all comes in. They use these systems, digital asset management systems, basically huge searchable databases. All those old documents and images that get put in there, that's how we're able to protect them and share them so easily.
So it's more than just knowing how to use a computer. It's knowing how to use technology to protect and share these pieces of history.
Exactly. And this is where it gets really interesting. The guide talks about the different stages of your career.
So we're talking about a career where you need to know about history. A and D, be good with technology. That's a cool combo. What does that even look like when you're climbing the career ladder?
The guide actually lays it all out really well. So you often start as an assistant cultural archive manager, like an apprenticeship.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so you're learning on the job. You're helping out with all sorts of things from like how to handle these super old fragile objects to digitizing all those historical documents.
It sounds like you'd get amazing experience right from the start. But where do you go from there?
So you move up, right? You become a junior cultural archive manager and then eventually a senior cultural archive manager. And with every step, you get more responsibility. So you end up leading teams, managing these big projects and making those important decisions about how we preserve and share all this cultural history.
So, like, you could start your career carefully handling a map from, say, like the 1500s, and then end up running a team that's building a virtual reality experience of that map so anyone can explore it online.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's wild.
It's quite a ride. And the even cooler thing is you can specialize. Say you're obsessed with old manuscripts. You can become the expert. Or maybe you're super into photography preservation.
Yeah.
You can totally focus on that. There's so many possibilities.
Speaking of possibilities, let's talk more about digitization. It feels like that's totally changing how we preserve culture.
Oh, sure.
What's the impact been?
Huge. Remember that museum fire we talked about?
Yeah. Digitization is like making a backup of history so we don't lose it. But it's not just about keeping things safe from disasters. It's about making sure more people can actually experience these things.
Right, because not everyone can just jump on a plane to visit a museum across the world,
Exactly.
but online, anyone can see it.
Yeah. Imagine a student, right? They're in a really small town, but they're super into ancient Roman architecture. With digitization, they can zoom in on every little detail of a mosaic in the Colosseum right there from their classroom.
That's amazing. It's like we're breaking down walls and making knowledge available to everyone.
Exactly.
But it's not as simple as just putting everything online, right?
No.
You've got to manage these massive digital collections.
Oh, 100%. Remember those digital asset management systems we talked about? Those are key. That's how we organize all this stuff, describe it, and make sure it's preserved properly. Think of them like meticulously organized digital warehouses of history.
Okay, I like that. So we've got these digital warehouses of history, but how do we make sure people actually use them? Those files aren't just going to magically organize and promote themselves.
You've hit the nail on the head. It's about advocacy. A cultural archive manager, they're not just a caretaker, they're a champion for these materials.
So they don't just preserve things, they need to get other people excited about them too. What does that actually look like in the real world?
Well, it takes many forms. They might be out there hustling to get funding to digitize, like a collection of photos that's about to fall apart. Or maybe they're working with teachers to create really engaging lessons using those very same photos.
So they're constantly building these bridges between the past and the present.
Yes. And they're not just sticking to the old ways, like just putting on museum exhibitions. They're embracing technology, online exhibitions, interactive maps, even podcasts.
Hey, now that's what we like to hear. So it's a really diverse job that needs serious tech skills. But the guide also mentions certifications. What are those all about?
Oh yeah, good catch. There are actually certifications you can get that can really boost your street cred in this field. Like, one of the most well-known is the Certified Archivist Credential, or CA. That's like the gold standard. It shows you really know your stuff.
So that's like getting your black belt in archival science. What about for the digital side of things?
So for that, there's the Digital Archives Specialist, or DES certification. That one's all about the technical side, like digitization, metadata, making sure those digital files last, all that jazz.
It sounds like it's constantly changing, this field, especially with technology moving so fast.
100%. You got to be able to adapt, always learning new tools and technologies. That's key.
It's not enough to just protect the past. You need to make sure your methods for protecting it can keep up with the times.
Exactly.
That's fascinating. It's easy to get caught up in all the tech talk, digitization, all that. But really, this job is about real objects, these tangible, often fragile pieces of history. What's it like actually working with those things?
That's the magic of this job, right? You're literally surrounded by history. One day you might be cleaning and carefully storing a collection of old maps.
Wow.
And the next, you're looking at a diary from hundreds of years ago, trying to read the faded ink, getting these little glimpses into the past.
It sounds like such a cool mix of being really careful and detail-oriented and being super curious. Do you have any stories that kind of show what I mean?
Oh, tons. One time I was working with a bunch of letters written by soldiers during World War II. And, they weren't just historical documents. They were full of emotion, like they missed home and you could see what everyday life was like in these crazy times. As I was preserving each letter, just like this wave of emotion, I felt so connected to the past.
Wow, that must have been intense. It reminds you that every object, every document, it all has a story behind it.
Right. And it's up to the cultural archive manager to make sure those stories can be told for years to come. It's about keeping the past alive.
And speaking of keeping things alive, this career is so much bigger than just managing a bunch of old stuff. It's about managing stories, protecting memories, really shaping how we understand our own history.
You said it perfectly. It takes passion, dedication, and a deep appreciation for the power of stories.
And a healthy dose of tech savvy, it seems.
Definitely.
But we shouldn't forget about networking. I mean, it's important in every field, but the guide really emphasized it for this one.
Yeah, it's crucial.
So what are some ways someone who wants to be a cultural archive manager can actually meet other people in the field?
Professional organizations are amazing for that. There's the Society of American Archivists, the International Council on Archives, places like that.
So it's like finding your people, the ones who get it.
Exactly. They have conferences, workshops, mentorship programs, all kinds of really valuable stuff.
And what about online? Where do these folks hang out online?
LinkedIn, for sure. It's gold for making those connections, finding resources, even job hunting.
So networking can help you stay in the loop and open doors to new opportunities.
100%. In this line of work, collaboration is everything. Sharing tips on how to preserve digital stuff, working on research projects together, it's all super valuable.
We've covered a lot. We talked about skills, the good and the bad, what it takes to be successful, how fast things are changing. But before we wrap up, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier. The job market's pretty competitive, right?
It can be, yeah.
Yeah.
You have to be realistic about it.
So what advice would you give to someone who's just starting out, someone who dreams of being a cultural archive manager?
Okay, three things. First, be passionate, like really passionate. This job isn't easy. You have to truly love history, be fascinated by different cultures, and really believe in the power of stories. Without that, those challenges can feel impossible to overcome.
Makes total sense. Okay, what's number two?
Be proactive. Don't just sit around like waiting for a job to show up. Go out and find it. Volunteer at museums, historical societies, maybe even a local archive, whatever's nearby.
Hmm.
Reach out to cultural archive managers you admire. Maybe ask for like a quick chat just to pick their brain. The more you get your hands dirty, the more ready you'll be.
So get out there, make those connections, get some real-world experience under your belt.
Exactly.
Love it. Okay. What's that last piece of advice? Was number three.
Become a tech whiz. Like we've been saying, digitization, it's changing the game for how we keep history alive and share it with the world. Get comfy using those digital archiving tools, wrap your head around metadata standards, and for goodness sakes, keep up with the latest tech, stuff like artificial intelligence. The more you know about tech, the more valuable you are.
It's kind of wild, right?
Mm,
How technology can bridge the gap between like ancient history and the future.
totally.
It really makes you think. We've been talking about protecting the things from the past, but what about what we're creating right now in this digital world?
Right, that's the big question, isn't it? What will the archives of the future look like? Will it be all tweets and TikTok dances instead of handwritten letters and dusty old photos?
It's kind of a mind-blowing thought.
It really is. And that's the challenge for the next generation of cultural archive managers, figuring out how to safeguard all this new stuff.
Yeah, it makes you realize this field, it never sits still, does it? There's always something new to learn, something new to figure out.
And that's what makes it so awesome. It's not just about preserving the past, it's about playing a role in how future generations will see it.
I love that. So to wrap things up for our listeners, we've learned that being a cultural archive manager is about way more than just old things. It's about being a protector of history, a tech-savvy storyteller, and someone who's passionate about making sure our shared history isn't forgotten.
Beautifully said. And hey, if this sounds like you, if you're fired up about history, fascinated by tech, and you really want your work to matter, this might be the perfect career path.
Absolutely. Huge thanks to our expert for joining us and sharing all this amazing insight. We really appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And everyone listening, if today's conversation sparked something in you, don't let it fade away. Go explore. Visit a museum, check out if your local library or historical society needs volunteers, spend some time getting lost in online collections. You never know what amazing things you might discover. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing.